into another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Wednesday, September 25th around here, and we have a great show for you today. We're going to start with our Week 5 predictions. We're going to go to Louisville at Notre Dame in the first segment. Going to be a really fun game up there in South Bend, and honestly, the winner of this one might be looking at the CFP with some real odds to get there. Then we'll get into Oklahoma State at Kansas State, a game that both these teams very badly need to win if they want to stay in that Big 12 conversation, and definitely one that I'm definitely leaning one way very aggressively, and I'll let you know exactly why when we do that segment. Then we'll get into kind of the Friday night lights. We'll get into Miami at Virginia Tech, Washington at Rutgers, a couple of really fun games on that Friday night that will have plenty to say about what the ACC and the Big Ten are this year. Obviously, two teams in Rutgers and Miami coming in with a lot of energy, but two teams in Washington and Virginia Tech that very much want to torpedo their seasons. Then we'll get into a little talk around the top 10 teams, get into who they're playing, what we need to see from them this week, with a couple of teams, including Ohio State and Ole Miss, facing their real first test of this upcoming season. So will be interesting to see how they react to that. And then we'll finish it out with some Week 5 questions. We have questions about Hugh Freeze's comments, questions about the future of the Pac-12 that would just got a little bit more interesting, and a question about the Group of 5 matchup of the week that one of them just changed drastically, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in the show. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have a fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat feature on the bottom of the Sports Network chat. You can click on that $sign. You can click on that $sign, add any question, any comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be interactive as we get further and further into the season, so utilize that whenever you'd like to. And also, the gsmcpodcast.net page is still up and working and does the exact same thing. So either of those you'd like to utilize, definitely do that, and we would love to have a little bit of an interactive experience here. But let's jump into this one, because this one's a little bit weird, no two ways about it. This is two teams that Notre Dame obviously has had the big loss of the season to Northern Illinois at home, and then you have a Louisville team that has been great thus far, has not necessarily had any real worries thus far, but hasn't been tested to this level by any means. Played Georgia Tech last week and looked okay, had a couple of plays that really tipped that game in their favor that I don't know if it was that big of a gap in that game, I guess is the best way to see it. So it'll be interesting to see how they can kind of react to what Notre Dame has to bring, and it's going to be really fun to watch this one go down, because I think both these teams are looking at this as kind of, I don't want to say, punching your ticket to the CFP, but if you look at the rest of these schedules for both these teams, they could win. If they win this one, they might just be off to the races and hard to stop from getting a playoff spot. So this is a huge game for so many different reasons, but more than anything else, Notre Dame lost this game away from home last year when they very much shouldn't have. They were favored by 7 points coming into this one. They're favored by 6 in this one, which feels a little bit crazy to me, but we'll talk about that throughout this one. I think there's a number of things going into this game, but Notre Dame's got to have that sour taste in their mouth from last year, and they definitely want to get right this year. But let's get to some players to watch, and I think we got to start with Chris Mitchell. He has not been nearly the factor that he needs to be for this Notre Dame offense, and it's not to say he has to be an absolute game breaker on Saturday, but the reality is Louisville knows who you are. They know what you're going to do, and they have a very good defensive front at stopping the run. So what are you going to do to counter it? How are you going to be able to possibly counter this? And we'll talk about another way they can do that here in a second. But Chris Mitchell is such a special player that they just haven't really tapped into all of that potential quite yet. And I think he can definitely do it in this game and then be off running the rest of the season. But you got to get him involved early just to keep this Louisville defense a little bit more honest against the pass. And then you got Xavier Watts on the defensive side of the ball for them, because Louisville's going to push the ball downfield. That is where they're most dangerous. That's what you saw against Georgia Tech last week, and we'll likely see a lot of that this week. Ja'Cory Brooks and Chris Bell have been absolutely incredible for them, and I think Xavier Watts is just going to have to make sure he keeps a cap on that offense and maybe gets a pick or two during this game to possibly, punish them for going deep and then force a little bit more of the run game to get involved for Louisville. And frankly, the run game has not been great. There's been a couple of games early on in the season where they've played fine on the ground, but against Tech last week, they did not play well at all. Donald Chaney was their leading rusher with 23 yards on 10 carries. That cannot happen this weekend. They cannot play a defense that is that good on the other side of the field and not be able to run the ball at all, because there's no earthly way you're going to be able to compete with that back end if you cannot bring them up into the box just a little bit. So it doesn't have to be special, but Donald Chaney, all of these incredible guys, Isaac Brown, all of these guys, they have a lot of running backs that they can throw at you. You got to find a run game with one of them, and you got to be able to at least get your feet under you, and Donald Chaney has a little bit more experience than the rest of these guys. And then Trammell Logan is the guy I want to talk about. We talked about him last week when we got into the Georgia Tech game, and frankly, he's going to face a very similar attack this week. He was incredible last week, and Riley Leonard is going to try to make him bite on that running back or try to get around him and get for 20 yards with his legs. If he can keep that under control, it's going to be really hard for Notre Dame to get anything going offensively, because I think we all know how poor that passing offense is right now. So Trammell Logan can totally change this game. He's a guy that if he makes those couple of tackles, maybe in the third quarter, in the fourth quarter, that could be the difference between them winning and losing this one. And let's get to how Louisville can win this one. And I think more than anything, you got to find the run game. We talked about what Donald Chaney had a week ago, 23 yards, 10 carries. Isaac Brown, the really talented freshman, only got 3 carries last week. There has to be more involvement from these running backs. And I'm not necessarily saying they're going to push around Notre Dame by any means, but if you're going to be wanting to push the ball downfield, you're not going to be able to do that against or Xavier Watts, against Benjamin Morrison, against all of these elite players on the back end for Notre Dame, if you can't get that run game going, if you can't pull those linebackers and those safeties down just a little bit, and then maybe you can hit those 1 or 2 big plays, which is the second key here. I think when you talk about Louisville, that's what they're going to do. They're going to attack you deep, and they're going to try to stretch the field, and Notre Dame is not an explosive offense. So let's say Louisville can come out in this one and score right away. They score a 60-yard touchdown on the first drive or what have you. Notre Dame might not be able to get back up. And the goal is for Louisville is just keep your neck out in front, make Notre Dame earn everything on offense, and bet that they can't keep up with you. You're not necessarily going to beat this Notre Dame offense every which way from Tuesday. You're not going to be able to roll down the field and just essentially roll in for a touchdown every single time. You got to hit those big plays, and you got to keep this defense confused and honest every which way. So hitting 1 or 2 big plays might be enough to beat out this Notre Dame offense that is all over the place right now. And with that Notre Dame offense, you got to keep Riley Leonard under wraps. You got to make sure his legs do not become a factor, because we've seen what it looks like when his legs are not a factor, and it doesn't look great. They're not really able to throw the ball. They don't have a ton of rhythm in that department, and once he starts running the ball, then things open up. He was really good last week, top 100 yards in the last 2 games rushing, had 5 touchdowns on the ground in the last 2. So that's what he's doing right now. That's the only way that they're going to be able to go about business the way that they want to, and Jeremiah Love is plenty talented. You're going to need this guy to be a runner if you're Notre Dame to win this game. So if you're Louisville, stopping him will definitely give you a huge leg up and make it just so much easier to handle this offense. Then for Notre Dame, I think you got to keep these receivers in front of you. We talked about how much they want to push the ball downfield. Ja'Cory Brooks made just a ridiculous play against Georgia Tech last week, and Chris Bell just got away from him on a number of different plays. They will cause problems for you if you give them openings. They will absolutely make you pay, and they will change this game in a hurry if you give them any openings. So Benjamin Morrison, Xavier Watts, all of these guys on that back end need to be ready for this, and they need to make sure that whatever they complete, whatever pass they complete is in front of you. I'm not necessarily saying that's an end-all, be-all. You're going to be successful if that's the case, but you definitely won't give up that big-time one. Notre Dame is fully ready for a rock fight. They're more than happy to get into one. You can't get into one if those guys are running free down the field. So keep them in front of you, tackle really well, and then you have a real shot for this defense to just stonewall this Louisville offense. You got to get Mitchell Evans involved as well. You just have to get this guy more involved in the offense. He has 7 catches, 68 yards on the season. He has to be more involved in that. Only had 27 yards against Purdue. He is one of the biggest players on this team. He's one of the most talented tight ends in the entire country, and he's one of those guys that can totally change the complexion of a game, of your season, in an afternoon. And I think when you talk about a team, especially like Louisville, that is so good at stopping the run, keeping some of those linebackers honest, keeping some of those safeties out of the run game is hugely important, and Mitchell Evans is going to be the guy to do it. Not to mention he's an absolute mismatch on pretty much everyone he lines up against. So find him. At some point, line something up where you get Mitchell Evans the ball, a la what the Eagles did with Dallas Goedert this last weekend. Would love to see that on the field for Notre Dame this weekend, and I think it would be a huge thing for them to possibly get this win. And then come out of the gate swinging. I think your fan base is nervous about this game. I don't think there's any two ways about that. They saw what happened at Northern Illinois. They saw what happened last week against Miami of Ohio. So they know this team is walking a thin line. They know that this team could fall off that at any point, and they know this is a game where it could very well happen because it happened last year. So you got to come out of the gate swinging, whether it's being really aggressive on defense and getting one of those takeaways like they were able to get against Georgia Tech, or it's coming out of the gates and just hitting a big play right away. Maybe that's something that they need, and maybe pushing the ball downfield right away is something Louisville will not be prepared for. So maybe just open up the scoring. Maybe just get this crowd a little bit more involved than you would expect them to be early on, and then you're off running. Because if you win this one, the only other one I don't love them in is the USC one at the end of the year, and you might be able to fix a lot of things before that game. So it's going to be an incredible game up there in South Bend, no two ways about that. The thing is, I have no trust in this Notre Dame offense. I think they're going to run the ball and run the ball and run the ball, and if you watched the Georgia Tech game last week, that is not a winning strategy against Louisville. You're going to have to be able to push the ball downfield. That was the only reason Georgia Tech stayed in that game, was because they hit a couple of big-time plays downfield. I don't think Notre Dame can do that. I think Notre Dame's defense is going to be tough. I think Louisville is going to be a little bit out of their sorts early on in this game. But again, as I talked about earlier, I think Corey Brooks is just going to make one play. I think Chris Bell is just going to make one play, and that's going to be the difference in this game. So it's not to say I don't like Notre Dame or I think they're a bad team. I just think when you look at this matchup, I think it's going to be one that comes down to the wire, that comes down to a couple of plays here and there because these teams are so aggressive running the ball. Louisville can make those one or two plays. I'm not sure Notre Dame can in the passing game. So I'll lean Louisville for the time being. This is one that I am very worried about. I think it could go either direction. I think Notre Dame definitely has their back up against the wall right now, so definitely one that they very much want to get. And I think on the Louisville side, you win this one, you're very much off to the races. You have Miami and Clemson coming up, but you could lose those two and still be very much in the CFP conversation. So a huge one for both those teams, and cannot wait to see it go down in South Bend. But we'll break that down once it goes final next week. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about a big-time Big 12 matchup this upcoming weekend. Oklahoma State heads up to Manhattan to play Kansas State in a game that both these teams badly need. And we'll break it down right after this, so stick with us.